I'm Adam Grant, Wharton professor. I'm here with Betty Liu, who's a Bloomberg anchor. You may know her from Betty in the Loop, also a Penn alum, and she's the author of the new book, Work Smarts, giving advice from CEOs on what it really takes to succeed in your career and get ahead. Betty, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Adam. Great to be here.
I'm just thrilled to have a chance to reverse our roles and put you in the hot seat today.
Vice versa. I know. I can't believe I am in the hot seat. So be nice to me, Adam.
I'll do my best. So why are you here? What motivated you to write this book?
You know, it was for a lot of people during the last few years. I've had several people when I've been at conferences, when I've been at events. I've had people come up to me, young people mostly, people from college, who've said, Betty, you're so successful. Please give me some advice about what I can do with my career. And I got enough of those questions that I started to think to myself, there is this great need, and I'm sure you see it all the time, Adam, of young people who want to get career advice. They want some direction. But what was funny was that while they were asking me these questions, I kept saying to myself, gee, I have these same questions. I want to know what to do with my career. I don't feel all that successful. I still want to know how these very basic questions, how to make your boss happy, how to ask for a raise, how to stand out, how to shine. And so I thought, if I still have these questions in the middle of my career, then other people must have those same questions. So who do I ask then? And so then I began to think, well, the best people to ask are the people who are at the top, who are at the very top of their careers. And those would be the CEOs that I talk to every day on our program on Bloomberg. So all of that kind of gelled together, and then it came into a proposal with my agent, and we put it together and sent it to the publisher. But in any case, so that's kind of the genesis of why I thought, hey, let me write this book. I'm sure others must have the same questions.
Yeah, I certainly do. And you got to talk to many interesting people in the business world. What were the most surprising insights that you got?
Well, first of all, I was very surprised at the number of people who said yes to the interview. I thought, some people might not want to reveal, all the dirty secrets on how they got ahead. But the second thing was how frank people were about their struggles. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JPMorgan, the chairman and CEO, was really open about his essentially fight with Sandy Weil, his mentor at Citigroup, and it got to the point where Sandy eventually fired him. And that was a huge controversy during the time when it was happening. And I guess enough years have passed that Jamie felt like he could talk about it. But he was really very open about, about that moment in his life. And he said, look, he went home, he told his daughters, I got fired. And he said for the first time, it was really strange to go from 90 miles per hour to zero. And that was the same thing, with other CEOs about the mistakes they made. Susan Lyne at AOL, she said, I made the huge mistake that I thought just because it was a great idea, it's a great business, and that's failed spectacularly. So I was just surprised at how people were just very honest about and genuine about their failures.
And is that easy to do because they're now back on the top, or have they been this way all along?
I think it's easier because you're back on the top. It's obviously a lot harder if you're still in that position. But I also felt that they were being that they would have mentioned it anyway, or that it's a part of their fabric of who they are. I felt like many of them did feel that the mistakes that they've made were just as important as the successes that you have, and in fact, probably even more important. I'm sure many who are watching this, or you and me, we've all learned from our mistakes, and in fact, there's that saying, right, that you can't feel happiness without some sadness. So it's almost like you can't feel that success if you don't have those failures too.
So how do you actually think about then taking that into sort of everyday life, right? Is the lesson to fail more often? Is it to try to figure out, okay,
try to reduce the number of failures? Yes.
Yeah, so how do you make those actually productive or learning opportunities based on what you learn from the folks you spoke with?
Well, a lot of it is attitude, right? I mean, the problem that the issue that people have is that, people fail all the time. I mean, I can even point to this book project and the number of book proposals I've had out there outweighs the number of books that I've actually written by, tenfold. So, for every success, there's about a dozen failures behind that. So it's a great question. How do you take that then into your everyday life? what I found, it's really all about, much of it is about attitude. How do you bounce back? It's almost like how you bounce back is more important than the failure itself. And so if you bounce back, if you have that positive attitude, which Adam, I know you are a perennial optimist as well. If you have that kind of attitude, it can mean such a difference to the path of your career versus being taken down by it and wallowing in that mistake. So I know it sounds kind of Pollyannish or whatever, but there's just evidence time and time again. There was a one piece of research I read in this book that I read for this book, and it had to do with this author of The Luck Factor, and he did this whole, I don't know if you know about this experiment, but he basically, long story short, he tried to find out why are some people lucky and why are some people unlucky, and he did this experiment where he put two people in a coffee shop. And he rigged one person to be a millionaire. One person was a quote-unquote millionaire, and he put a £5. This is in Britain, so he put a £5 note right outside the coffee shop, and he had one person who was considered himself lucky go through the exact same experience as a person who thought of herself as unlucky. So basically, that person who was lucky found the £5 note, went into the coffee shop, bought a cup of coffee, sat next to the millionaire, struck up a conversation, and they had the beginnings of a great relationship. The person who was unlucky walked by the £5 note, just like on cue, went into the coffee shop, bought her coffee, sat next to the millionaire, and did not say a word to the millionaire and left the coffee shop and said, and didn't do anything. And so when you look at those two instances, who's lucky and who's unlucky, and who makes their luck and who doesn't, and who misses the luck. So it really is, in many ways, about your attitude, about how you behave in life.
Mm-hmm. Is there a sort of counterintuitive piece of advice that you picked up through this process?
That's a great question. I don't know about counterintuitive, but there was a great piece of insight that Sam Zell, the real estate mogul from Chicago, that he said to me that really made me rethink about what a big organization is really about. He said to me, look, as an entrepreneur, I need as much information as possible. In a big corporation, people use information as currency. So they trade it. The more information a person has, the more power that person has in a big organization. But he said, in a small company or an entrepreneurial environment, if you're keeping a piece of information away from me, then you're damaging my own company, because I need to make decisions, quickly, and I need to make them with as much information as possible. So he told me a story about a woman that he hired from a major corporation. He said she was an overachiever. He said she was a star all the way through her career. Came into his organization 9 months later, he fired her, and he said it was because she used the same practice of using information as currency. And when he told me that, I thought, geez, how many big companies have I worked for where I have seen that happen? I have done the same thing. I have committed the same crime of using information to get information from other people, and using information and hoarding it so that I have the power, over the colleagues that I work with. And I thought, geez, that is such a great observation, and I need to check myself and make sure I'm not doing something like that, because organizations talk about transparency, but it's the execution of it that really obviously matters.
Yeah, I think it's something we've all faced. And,
yes.
I think about my own experiences of, you come across a piece of knowledge that seems to be unique. Do you basically use it for your own benefit, or do you try to figure out how to share it for some kind of collective gain?
Well, yes, because Jay Samit, who is a founder of this company called Uvu, it's like a Skype-like company, he said to me, we were sitting for coffee and talking about this book, and I was doing an interview for the book, and I said, what about because he's a perennial entrepreneur. He's a perennial startup guy. He's started up, a dozen companies. And I said, what about ideas? How do you come up with ideas? And when you come up with ideas, what do you do with them? He says, every person's job is to make sure that if they have an idea, not to hoard it, but to give that idea to everybody else. And I said, but people say, I have an idea and I want to keep it and I don't want anybody to know about it. He said, no, your job is to kill your idea. He said, beat it up, find every single way why that idea is a bad idea. And what you come out with at the end is the actual idea. So when he told me that, I thought, wow, everyone has a different reaction. They all think they have to, keep their idea secret and, only release it at a time that they feel like it's the proper time. But he was saying absolutely not. Just broadcast it out. He said, because part of the reason is that many people have great ideas, but very few actually follow up on them. So that's, if you're the rare person who follows up, you're way ahead of the game.
It reminds me of some research by Dunbar and colleagues who found that successful microbiology labs that produced a lot of patents and groundbreaking innovations actually had this norm of just tearing each other's ideas apart. Right. And you almost couldn't get through a day without having your idea dissected and destroyed, but it was for ultimately the benefit of new discoveries.
Right, exactly. That's exactly the same idea. You're like, wait a minute.
Where did this come from?
Where did this come from?
Well, I'm curious, there's just a fascinating sort of cast of characters in this book. And if you think through the different interviews that you did, are there one or two people who stand out as the most interesting?
Well, Sam Zell, I think, is a fascinating character himself. And Warren Buffett, of course. I've interviewed him, about a dozen times so far in my career, and he's always, very, very interesting. But, it's almost like trying to pick from like your, because they were actually all really, really interesting. But Jamie Dimon, I thought was, this was right at the height of the London whale fiasco. And I had a little bit of a curiosity to just see, did he have more stress lines on his face? Was he, just a little bit more down from everything? And he was true to form, he knew he had to be on, but he was very, sort of still Jamie Dimon, still, I'm going to get through this and I'm going to get this company through this. Bob Benmosche actually was a really interesting interview. And I'd always heard all these stories about him and, that he's kind of a, quirky guy, and he came out. He had a vineyard in Croatia, and he came out of retirement to take over AIG, and he, called. I don't know if you remember the famous line where when he came out of retirement, he had said something to the effect of, "I'm going to take over AIG. I'm going to bring this company back to life, and I don't care what those crazies in Washington think of me." And those crazies in Washington got pretty pissed off at him, and didn't like what he said about them. But I just thought he was very interesting because he had a lot of insights about what it was like to be not poor, but almost on the brink of bankruptcy when he was younger, when his father passed away. So I know I'm rambling here with some of these stories, but they were all, I took nuggets from all of them and just applied them to my life.
Well, I guess on the subject of applying some of these ideas to your life, you said you were surprised that so many people actually said yes to these interviews. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I wonder about is if you didn't have the history and the relationship with them, if you weren't at Bloomberg, what can we learn from a successful journalist about how to actually get access to somebody whose ideas are so important?
Well, it's funny you mention that, Adam, because, yes, the Bloomberg platform helps, and yes, the fact that I've been in this career for so long also helps. But, I want part of my motivation in a way for a book like this is I want to let people know that access to people like Jamie Dimon and Warren Buffett and Bob Benmosche and Sally Crouch, it's really not that hard. I mean, any of your students, if they tried hard enough, would be able to get a response from any of these people. It's accessibility. It's being able to go to them with the right question and the right proposal. And any one of them would be accessible to anybody. And that was kind of what I wanted to, that was kind of a motivation for the book, that, here's the access, but you yourself can get that access if you try and you just apply your energy to it.
Tell us how.
Good ideas, good questions, hard work to find their correct contact info. I do believe in the 6 degrees of separation. You can always find somebody who knows someone who knows someone who knows that person. And I think that kind of skill is so important in whatever profession you are, whether it is journalism or you're an entrepreneur or you're a banker, you're a professor, So, but once you get in the door, it's important to really think carefully. How do you approach that person? What's your compelling opening to them. And people, for instance, they email me, and if there's a big difference between emailing me because they've read something that I've written or that I did on my show, or they're seeking some sort of guidance or advice, versus, hi, my name is such and such, and could you help me with something? There's such a big difference. I'm sure, Adam, you get tons of emails like that too, and there are differences. There's different approaches, and some are more effective than others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's no doubt about that.
No doubt about that.
Well, I think it's interesting that you were sort of encouraged to write a book on career advice that you would offer, and then you turned to other people and curated their advice.
Right.
But if you do look back on your own career and think about how your view of what it takes to succeed has changed over the past few years, what do you know now that you hadn't perhaps thought about before?
That's a great question. I've always known that, my parents taught me, you have to work hard. You have to work hard. You have to, know your stuff, do your research. And so when I left college and I started out, that was kind of my focus. Work hard, do all your research, everything that whatever work that you do is going to rise to the top if it's good work, no matter what. So that was my focus when I graduated in my 20s. But as I've gotten older and older, I start to realize that it's much more that now my career is, yes, all about that, but also I've learned that relationships really matter, that being likable really matters, that giving is almost more important than it is, and it always is, but taking, that, that there is really, that those things are also almost just as important, and maybe even more so than just being a really excellent writer or a really, great show host. So I've kind of, I guess you could say, matured, in my view through the years, where, I had sort of this very narrow kind of view of like, how do I get successful? How do I be successful? So now it's more about, what about the people around me, and how do I lift them up so that then I will also be lifted up? How do I become, how do I make sure I'm every day adding to them? How do I give to them so they'll give back to me? Those sorts of things I'm learning now as I get older.
Well, needless to say, I'm a huge fan of that particular message.
I know, yes.
And in closing, if you think about the different ways that you try to help or give back to others, is there a favorite that stands out?
Well, I always hope that when I'm on the program and I'm doing my interviews, or I'm essentially reporting information, I'm always hoping that I'm teaching somebody something, that I'm giving them information that they couldn't have gotten before anywhere else, or that it's analysis that they couldn't have gotten anywhere else. So I always hope I'm doing that on an interpersonal level. I just try to mentor as many people as I can. Young people who come up to me and say, I would like to be in television, or I would like to do journalism, or many of them come up to me and say, what should I do? So I'd love to do more of that, and I think as I continue with this book, that I'm hoping that I get to parse out some of that information and be able to distribute that to other people, so that hopefully, a light clicks for them, or something clicks for them in their heads, and it changes the way they view their careers.
I'm looking forward to watching that. And again, congratulations on the launch of Work Smarts.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you very much.